folks. Welcome, everybody, back to another episode of Pirkei Avos, the Ethics of the Fathers, live from Israel with Rabbi Chaim Coffman. Always a good time. He's teaching us the depth of the ethics of the Fathers, and we know we can't go wrong with ethics because we then understand why we're doing what we do. It's just the right thing to learn. And who better to teach us than a rabbi in Israel? Rabbi Coffman, you're live on the air. How you doing today, sir? And thank you so much. I believe we're holding again still on Mishnah 2, chapter 2, Mishnah 4.
We are chapter 2, Mishnah 4. It's always a pleasure. It's a nice, relaxing Shabbos since most of my kids are in isolation, so they can't really go too far. Come in contact with someone who's got, corona. So, okay, so it's relatively quiet, but, nothing so quiet. But regardless, we are again, chapter 2, Mishnah 4. And, one thing to keep in mind, as you mentioned, at the outset, but we're not going to get sidetracked, and you speak about ethics. So yes. There are things that a person may hear, within Judaism and say, wow, that's a pretty crazy thing. That's an unbelievable thing. How could that really be, if it's about ethics or about anything else, right? And obviously it has to be understood, right? Mm-hmm. It has to be understood from a Jewish perspective. You can't look at things and say, oh, I can't read Hebrew. I've never learned anything, but I have a strong opinion. Why do you have a strong opinion? If someone said something stupid when I was in camp, we'd say, learn the rules, play the game, practice, right? So, yeah, ethics are good. You have to understand the base of what it is, right? We have to put our minds and our souls into Torah, not put a 21st century spin on what I think is true or not true, right? First of all, you have to understand the question. Then you have to look into it and say, okay, what does it mean? Right, but you have to look according to our sources. You're not going to look at Christian sources to understand what Judaism says, right? That'd be kind of silly, right? Because they're far from the source, right? But in the end, we have to put our minds and our souls into Torah, not what we think. We hear a statement, got to analyze it, got to understand it. No, that's stupid. What do you mean stupid? Think about it. What does it mean? What's behind it? What do the sources tell us? Then go back and understand the sources before you open up your big mouth. That was just way of introduction, right? So the Mishnah says, he used to say, treat his will as if it's your own will, right? You'll treat your will as if it was his will. Nullify, we're going to speak about nullifying your will before his will. We're going to get there so that he will nullify the will of others before your will. Meaning, if I lay myself down, and I do what God wants, I prop a fear of heaven, he's going to take care of my needs, right? Mm-hmm. He's going to take care of the will of others that, people shouldn't damage me, etc. So whatever, we're going to speak about that. Last week, went into, great detail speaking about the virus and, and someone causing, someone else, to get it and what happens and, and all that. So we're going to continue. There's when we speak about keeping mitzvahs in general, there's a difference of opinion between the Rambam, between Maimonides, and the Chassid Yavitz, right, who lived about 300, 400 years ago, as to the will of a person when it comes to fulfilling mitzvahs. So according to the Rambam brings down in Shmona Prakim, he brings down chapter 6, which is the back of every tractate Sanhedrin, whatever, it's a whole thing about Jewish philosophy in general, how to look at, Torah and oral law, and all that. So it comes on the Rambam, and the Rambam says that he brings the Medrash. And what does the Medrash tell me? Now, a Medrash is a Tanaic statement. It's a statement from the rabbis at the time of the Talmud, right? Now, the interesting thing is, it didn't make it into the Talmud itself. Right, so obviously Rabbi Yehuda Nossi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, and you have he put together the Mishnah, and you got Ravasi put together the Gemara, organized it, etc. So for whatever reason, they felt these statements didn't make it into the Talmud, right? They made it into what we call midrash. Now, midrash, anyone who knows anything, we never, ever, I shouldn't say ever, but usually we don't look at medrash as authoritative when it comes to Jewish law. In other words, very interesting, a lot of interesting stories, statements, etc. There can certainly be contradictions within different midrashim that we don't necessarily get so concerned about. We do try and answer up to a certain extent, but many of them do not have any connotation when it comes to Jewish law. So in other words, a medrash is good, it's nice, it can help explain things in a homiletic way, but it's not as authoritative. Right now, if someone says, wow, I learned in a medrash, and this is what we do halachically, don't listen to them. Right? Because they're talking out of their elbow. Right? In other words, the authority comes from the Talmud, right? Comes from the rabbis, comes from the later commentaries, the early commentators, the later commentaries, etc. And that's what we do today according to the code of Jewish law. Now, I'm not saying medrash isn't important, right? It's also a portion of Torah, right? But when it comes to Jewish law, we're not quoting from midrashim in general, right? They do open up what the Torah says in many different ways, right? But again, when it comes to Jewish law, we don't look at it as, certainly as authoritative as we'd look at anything in the Talmud. So comes along the Medrash, and the Medrash says that we know that for a Jew, eating pig is forbidden, right? We're not allowed to eat pig. Torah says clear. But a person should not say, I'm disgusted by it. They should say it's probably very tasty, right? You can make pork chops, can make all kinds of things, probably extremely tasty. But my Father in heaven forbids it, right? In other words, a person can say, oh, I'm disgusted by that. Okay, right? A person can be disgusted by something not kosher. But that is not why we don't eat it. Right. In other words, I could never imagine, eating sushi, or eating if it would be forbidden, right? Forbidden fish or whatever, or eating, any creepy crawly thing. You go to Southeast Asia, they eat anything that moves, right? They, that's gross, right? Because we couldn't imagine eating ants or eating dogs or eating cats. I mean, if you can, okay, right? But most people are probably grossed out by it unless you grew up with it. Right, in general. So you can say, okay, that's kind of gross because we don't eat these type of things, right? But if you're going to say it's forbidden and we're not allowed to eat it, why are we not allowed to eat it? We're not allowed to eat it because God said so, right? In other words, it may be very tasty. Mix it with different things, got a meal, right? Tremendous. Maybe you'll belch afterwards. It's such a great meal. If you're Greek, you break the dishes. Okay, whatever it is, however you enjoy the meal, right? But in the end, we're not saying it's not tasty. We're not saying it's not good. Not only that, we're not saying if you're a non-Jew, it affects you in a negative way, right? Which we mentioned many times. By a Jew, it'll affect them in a negative way, even if science hasn't proven it. Good. So what are we going to say? We're not going to say, I could never eat pig. It's gross. It's disgusting. Yeah, it may be gross how it lives. And it runs around in the mud and it eats anything that moves. Yeah, it's kind of a disgusting animal in general. But again, meat is meat, right? You're not going to make a distinction between that, cow meat, what do you call it, dog meat. It's meat. Okay, some has different texture, whatever it is. But whatever you do to it, you put spices on it, cook it with other things. Beautiful, right? Smoke it. There you go. Smoke it, whatever it is. What's going to be the issue? The issue is God says I'm not allowed to eat it.
Right.
So the Rambam makes a distinction, and he elaborates between what we call a chok. A chok is something that doesn't make rational sense, right? In other words, a chok is like the red heifer. The red heifer, if you took a cow that was never worked, right, that was all red, right, you never put another animal on it, etc. And now someone who is impure, the Kohen takes the cow, kills the cow, takes the ashes, sprinkles it on the other person. The other person becomes pure. The Kohen himself becomes impure. Makes no sense, logically. If I make somebody pure, the other one can't be impure at the same time, right? It's illogical. Now, comes along King Solomon, he said that was probably one of the only mitzvahs he didn't understand fully. And he's the wisest of all men. Right now, it doesn't mean we don't have to try and understand it. to the best of our ability, right? Regardless, it's something we don't understand, right? The laws of kashrus, right? You take milk, you take meat. Milk, if it's kosher, I can drink it. Meat, if it's slaughtered properly, I can eat it. If I put milk and meat together and I cook them over a flame, right? If they're both cold, I could eat them, right? As long as the meat's not solidified with milk. All I have to do is wash it off, right? There's no change of heat over here. Heat is going to make it forbidden. Now, if I take two things that are permissible, milk and meat, I put them together and now overheat, it makes it forbidden. Does that make sense? Doesn't make sense, right? That's not something that is, that's not something that's logical. If I have woolen linen, right? Shatnez, as it's called in the Torah. I have a sweater. That's woolen linen. I have to get it checked to make sure if it says 100% wool, I have to get it checked. Why do I have to get it checked? I have to make sure there's no linen in it. There could be linen in the buttons. It could be linen in other parts, whatever it is, by a suit. Check the shoulders. There are many places you check, right? Why do you do that? Because that's what the Torah says, right? There could be deeper meanings, right? Doesn't mean we just say, okay, God said it, we do it, right? You have to keep it, but you have to understand it as well. That's right. It comes along the Rambam, and the Rambam says he makes a distinction between a chok, i.e. a mitzvah we don't understand. Just while I'm on that subject for a second, right? They'll be saying, someone asked me, how do I know the Torah says you're not allowed to pick and choose, right? In other words, someone asked the question, how many of the 613 mitzvahs can I keep as a Jew, right? So probably less than half. Someone pointed out probably a third. Could be, right? Because a lot of things that a person would do if there was a temple in Jerusalem. You don't live in Jerusalem, right? We don't have sacrifices today. Okay. There are tithes we take from food. There are things we do that only women can do and not men. Maybe a person didn't have kids. You didn't do that. You didn't get divorced. You didn't do that mitzvah, but it's less than half, right? Probably a third. So someone says, well, how do you know you're supposed to keep all of them? Like, what are you, a jokester? What do you mean? The Torah says clear. God says, this is the Torah placed in front of Moshe. God says, Moshe is my trusted servant. You listen to whatever Moshe says. Where did God say that? Where did God say that? Mount Sinai. Right? He gives Moshe Rabbeinu a stamp of approval at Mount Sinai. Bam. Right? 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60. Not including women and children. Do the math. I was pretty good at math. There's about 3 million people that God says you'll listen to Moshe. Moshe wrote it in Torah. You're not allowed to add or subtract. Right? Forget about the Karaites. Because the rabbis made it up. Yeah, we've spoken about that. So the Torah says clear. I have to keep this. I have to keep that. What about all the sacrifices? I can't keep all the sacrifices. We don't do it today. There are no sacrifices. Right? We can't do it today. So we're not Kohanim. A lot of people are not Kohanim. If they're not Kohanim, right, there are a lot of things they can't do. Right? But if they were Kohanim, there'd be plenty of mitzvahs they could do. So now, the onus is on the other person to show where in the Torah it says, I'm allowed to pick and choose. The Reform movement says, we don't care about the Torah. We're going to do whatever we want. But our goal is to uproot Torah. Okay. Conservative movement says, we're going to preserve it. Right? We're going to keep certain things. We're going to go according to Jewish law. Not true. Right? Certainly not true because they don't. Regardless of that, they'll say, this doesn't make sense to me. I don't have to keep it. Where do you see that? Where do you see, and I heard this in the conservative movement when I studied there, you have to change according to the times. That's beautiful. Now, if you would bring all these people in and that would work, okay. But where does it tell me in the Torah? Show me a proof. Show me the Torah itself inside, right? From Genesis to Deuteronomy. Show me the prophets, where it says I can do whatever I want. The Christians are good at that because they'll make it up as they go along, and they'll claim all kinds of things that don't make any sense, right? But within the Torah itself, right, any reformer, conservative Jew, show me you have a right to do that according to the Torah. Oh, I think it's written by man. Prove it. Show me. I got plenty of proof why it's written by God. Plenty. Right? That's not the topic for now. I did a whole bunch of videos on that on Tanakh Talk. The point is whether the mitzvahs make sense, which a lot of them don't. Probably 80% don't. Right? I would say, all the mitzvahs are a chok at a certain level. There are laws we don't really fully understand, because even if we do fully understand, right, that's called a mishpat. A mishpat means a law that I don't need the Torah to tell me. Don't steal. Don't kill, right? They're also because God told me to do it. But if God wouldn't have told me to do it, that would have been a universal law. That would have been something all Noahites would have to keep, right? Because that makes sense logically according to the Torah. So the reason is because I don't need necessarily a decree from God to tell me what to do if it's obvious. But
Moral
nonetheless,
imperative. Yeah.
Moshe Rabbeinu says, this is what you have to keep. So it all comes from Mount Sinai, right? Every last detail comes from Mount Sinai. The oral law as well, right? The written law all comes from Mount Sinai. So the onus is on someone else to say, hey, where does it say I'm allowed to pick and choose? It doesn't. But even without all that, forget about the moral imperatives, forget everything else. You want to believe that? Great. Show me it works, right? I'm very big into statistics. Show me it works. 60, 70, 80% into marriage, assimilation, game over, right? It's game over. So, if you were to tell me, Judaism has to change. It's got to change with the times. We're going to count women. We're going to do all these gay rabbis, all these different things. That's beautiful. Show me they're bringing in tens of thousands of people during the week to learn. During the week, they're keeping Shabbos, right? They're keeping other aspects of the Torah. Show me. Not true, right? These places are all dying. If they're all dying, they're just lacking burial, but they're all dying. A friend of my father's, someone I grew up with, many years ago said, you tell your son in Israel, this synagogue's not going to die, right? It was a mourner's minyan, right? And most people there were over the age of 75, right? So you do the math. It's not going to be very hard. It's not going to be very long before the place dies, because most people are going to die within 10, 15 years, right? There's no one to replace them. So this guy said, you tell your son in Israel, it's not going to happen. We're not going to die. 2 years later, I said, say the mourner's prayer. Yes, God does. Yes, God does. It was over, right? Made sense. They sold the synagogue, right? Made sense. So you want to open up your big trap, show me it works. If you can't show me it works, which it doesn't, I got ample evidence to show it, very easy to show why it doesn't work. If you're going to tell me you're going to bring in all these people and everything else, great. But you don't, right? So the Rambam, again, distinguishes between a law we don't understand, right, and things we do understand. But even things we do understand, we have to keep because it's a law, because God said so. That's it. We understand it better. We don't understand it better. Comes along Moshe Feinstein, one of the Torah giants of the last generation. America, according to everybody, no question about it. Moshe Feinstein in Parshas Korach. We're going to get to Korach one day, probably in about 30 years, right? We're going to get to Korach. Korach says, and it says in Ethics of Our Fathers, honor, jealousy kills a person, right? Speaking about Korach, right? So over there, the commentaries say, because we're not going to get there for about 30 years, but the commentaries over there say that you can take this literally, that he was jealous of Moshe Rabbeinu. Being jealous of Moshe Rabbeinu killed him, because he saw the miracles in Egypt. He's the one that held the ark, right? And there were people that held the ark weren't worthy. They died, right? So he was on a very high level. That being the case, everyone asks the question, how could someone so brilliant, how could be someone holding such a level, how could they fail over here? Comes along Moshe Feinstein, he says he missed the point. How did he miss the point? He was there at Mount Sinai, came out of Egypt, right? He's one of the 20% that came out of Egypt. So he saw the miracles in Egypt, saw the miracles in the desert. So it says Moshe Feinstein, you know what he missed? He missed a very simple point. He didn't get the message. He did not internalize the message. Because he didn't internalize the message, he went off and took 250 great people with him, and they all got destroyed. Why? Because of jealousy. So I want to be the high priest. He didn't say I want to be the king, because Moshe Rabbeinu was the king. If he would have said I want to be the king, they would have killed him. Right? So he said, okay, I don't want to be the king. I want to be the high priest. Right? I also have connections. I also have a pedigree. So if I also have a pedigree like Aaron, right? So you gave it to your brother. Why don't I deserve it? I also have a pedigree. I also have a good pedigree. Well, Moshe Rabbeinu's not doing anything on his own, right? He's not doing anything on his own. If he's not doing anything on his own, why is he doing it? Because God told him. And he mentioned this many times. This is not me. God says this is what you have to do. I guess, certain things may look bad to people. Why giving them this? Why doing that? When it comes to the tabernacle and all the things that they had to build the tabernacle for, Moshe Rabbeinu gives an accounting of every last thing. Why? Hey, what if there's things missing? He probably pocketed it and made him rich. Moshe Rabbeinu, the most humble of all people, right? Boggles the mind, right? Absolutely boggles the mind. That's what the Rambam says. That's what the Rambam says, distinguishing between a law we don't understand and laws that make sense. But the reality is, we have to keep them all anyway, right? Even the ones that make sense, it's God-given, right? God doesn't necessarily have to tell me that, but I still have to keep it, right? Comes on the Avos, and the Avos tells us in the name of the rabbis, you can look it up, Brachos 34b, Sanhedrin 99a, and he says that in a place where Baalei Tshuva, i.e. returnees to Judaism, in other words, someone who grew up as a Jew, right? They were born Jewish, but they didn't know anything about Judaism. They can stand where righteous people cannot stand. Right? And the Talmud in Sukkah 52a says, greater the person spiritually, the greater their evil inclination. Now the question is, okay, well, what does that have to do with anything? Right? What are these pieces of Talmud telling us? Well, let's backtrack. Let's backtrack. Says the Talmud over here, in a place where Baalei Tshuva, i.e. returnees to Judaism, they grew up without learning about Judaism. Right? Maybe they lit a Hanukkah menorah. Maybe they ate matzah on Passover, etc. But they don't know anything about Judaism. Most Jews today, 90%, right? Most Jews don't know anything about Judaism. That being the case, if they've had trials and tribulations, how could they not stand? How could a righteous person, stand where they stand? You take someone who is an FFB, right? FFB means he's from birth. Born as a religious Jew, right? The religious parents. And let's say they have a tremendous pedigree, right? Grandparents, great-great-parents, all great in Torah mitzvahs. Good. You're going to tell me someone who doesn't have the opportunity, someone doesn't have the desire to eat pig, right? Or to watch a movie or, watch the CFL or anything else. I don't know if you have a desire for that. That's a different issue, right? Regardless
we didn't have
of that,
it last year.
I never know how these things come up, just ranking on the CFL. But in general, a righteous person is not going to have that desire, right? Forget about if it's a Bush League. He's not going to have a desire. You're going to watch the NFL, right? To watch the NBA, to watch anything, right? If he's not going to have that desire, then why can't he stand where a Baal Tshuva stands? He's greater, 10 times greater. Right? So what's really going on? What's the real question here? The question is, Baal Tshuva has all kinds of struggles. Doesn't mean a righteous person doesn't have struggles. Doesn't mean someone who grew up from doesn't have struggles. They don't have the same. They definitely don't have the same struggle. So we would think that a righteous person, that a righteous person, since they don't have these type of struggles, should never be able to stand where a Baal Tshuva stands. Because they're on a much higher level. They're on a much, much higher level. One second. So a Baal Tshuva, though, has all kinds of desires that he has to overcome. Now, when it comes to his realization, what he's been doing or she's been doing up until this point, is nothing. And now they have to really tune in. But they have real struggles. If they have real struggles and they overcome them, don't they grow exponentially greater than a righteous person doesn't have those struggles? That's what we would say. So I'll bring you a proof before you ask the question. You see by Yitzchak and Rivka, right? When Rivka's having all these, movements in her stomach, it's the Medrash says that when she went by a place of idolatry, Esav wants to get out. She goes by, a study hall, base Medrash, so Yaakov wants to go out. So she goes to Shem and asks them, what's going on here? Right? What in the world's going on here? So they both pray. They both pray for understanding, etc. And Yitzchak's prayer is accepted before hers. Right. Now the whole question is why? her father is evil, right? Her father is evil. She became a Balas Tshuva, so to speak. Married a great pedigree into Abraham's family, marries Yitzchak, right? So why isn't her prayer accepted first? Yitzchak already has a great pedigree. His father brought the world to understanding of one God. Whether he came to this realization at 3, the age of 40, right? He converted the masses, many, many people. Everyone was, walking around with their own pocket God. They're like, yeah, here's God, here's Bob, don't leave home without him, right? They had all their pocket gods. They say, hey, have you ever seen God? No. Have they ever spoken to you? At this point in time, no. But I know
Man
he
on a
exists
stick.
through design, through a world of design, right? I spoke about that also in my videos in Tanakh, Beseder. So according to that, her prayer should have been accepted first. Why? Because she came further, right? So commentaries say, you know what? Why is Isaac's prayer accepted? His father was Abraham. Big deal, right? He comes from an unbelievable pedigree, right? But if you start off at a certain level, you got parents going to educate you in the right way. You're going to go in that right direction. It's much, much harder to stay in the straight and narrow path than someone who has trials and tribulations. Because why? First, you get burnt out. You get burnt out, right? Someone who came back, someone who came out of, became a, Orthodox Jew when they grew up Reform, conservative, whatever. Or someone leaves Christianity, becomes a Noahide. You don't take anything for granted, right? You certainly don't take anything for granted. The joke is, how do you know when a Baal Tshuva, someone who returns to Judaism, how do you know when he made it into the Orthodox community? How do you know when he's established? So what's the answer? The answer is because he speaks when the Torah is being read. Why? So you don't get the joke. The joke is that sometimes when the Torah is being read,
he's the one reading
in certain places, people are schmoozing. People are schmoozing when they shouldn't be, right? So a lot of places you don't have this problem. In some places, you might have the problem with a rabbi. I've been in a few places like that. The rabbi has to bang on the lectern and keep people quiet so they can hear the reading of the Torah. It's a total disgrace, right? But they feel comfortable speaking when the Torah scroll is open. Why? I don't know. It's a total disgrace. But I'm saying, but the joke is, how do they feel comfortable? Because they do the same things as other Orthodox Jews, right? That's how they feel. I'm not saying it's right. I'm definitely not saying it's right. But in any case, they have a great pedigree, right? Sorry, Isaac had a great pedigree. So if he had a great pedigree, staying on that same level and growing and growing and growing, you don't have these other temptations, a lot more difficult, in a certain way. It's not easy to live inspired your whole life. Yeah, you kept Shabbos because you kept the week before, right? Something inside of a person may die because they just get burnt out. They just want to chill. They want to relax. They don't want to hear about fire and brimstone. They don't want to hear what's going to be in the next one. They've heard all this already, right? It's much harder to grow in a certain way unless you're really being pushed, unless you have that fire, that fire that's lit every day, which is not an easy thing to do, considering we get beaten down in life, in general. So somebody like that's at a higher level, right? First of all, they don't have these other desires. That's true, right? But at the same time, they were born in a certain way, totally different. So if they're born in a different way and their parents are going to educate them in the right and proper manner, so then for them to keep that fire lit on a daily basis, that's how great Yitzhak was. Because, he learned everything from his father, right? He saw the chesed, the acts of loving kindness through his mother, right? So therefore, he couldn't take anything for granted. He's born in such a great family. So the fact that he kept growing and growing and growing and growing, it doesn't that show how great he is going to say? But he started off, it's like someone saying, they started off, being a Rockefeller, right? So it's very easy to get them established in business. They already had money, everything was easy. Okay, they could lose money. They could certainly lose money in the process, but they've already started at the top. Once you started at the top, maybe someone's going to say, okay, I'll just live on the interest. I'll see the world. I'll enjoy everything. And, everything's good. I'm not going to have to work because everything's been done for me. But in spiritual terms, that doesn't work. Nope. You don't rest on your laurels. Doesn't matter who your parents are, right? My Rebbe's mother used to say in Yiddish, Yichus, this is a Machayiv. Yichus means my genealogy My pedigree only makes me more obligated, right? In other words, if my father was a rabbi and his father was a rabbi, whatever, so it makes my responsibility much greater. But she used to say it's like adding an extra zero. That's all it is. Because if you don't live up to it, a person can be broken for it. But, just because you're born into it doesn't mean anything. It just means you have a better head start than other people. But you could also waste it, right? Yeah, question.
Well, not as much a question but as much as a statement, Rabbi, because the points you're really bringing out to me has always touched home, and I've had to reflect often. And one of my favorite books that I refer to, I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's called The 8 Chapters of the Rambam. 8 Chapters of the Rambam. The edition I'm reading is by Feldman, Rabbi Yaakov Feldman. But the one chapter 6, he really describes the difference between the eminent person and one who controls his desires. And I think that's exactly the point that you're bringing out, that the struggles when, like you say, the Baal Tshuva, he's got to go through so much because it's relative to, the greatness is relative to the struggles. There's an offset there. And those that never have those struggles or challenges, I think often, life's so easy for them. Look, they got it easy, but in reality,
but they have other struggles. No one goes to this world without struggling.
Yes.
They have different, they have different struggles. Whatever those struggles are, they're not, they're not the same. But the fact that they grow and they grow and they grow, even without those struggles, right? A person can get burnt out. There's only so much a person can take on a regular basis. But obviously, if you believe it's the right thing. Obviously, if you have that fire lit and you have goals that you want to accomplish and you want to get to, right? Everybody, certainly Jews who, spend most of their time learning should have set goals. How much you want to accomplish.
Every year.
What you want to do. Because if you don't have goals, it's just learning ad nauseum, which is not necessarily a bad thing, right? But then you sort of lose the desire, right? You don't have any goals. You don't have any direction. Right, you definitely don't have any direction. That's why I think people should learn, be able to teach also if they're able to, right? That would certainly help them. Also, finishing things, at a proper level, would also they feel accomplished going through Tanakh, going through books of Mussar, right? I know somebody. I don't know if they still do this, but they have they learn with somebody once a week on a Thursday for 15 minutes. That's all they do. 15 minutes.
15 minutes
once a week. And they were learning books of ethics, Mussar. So they went through Paths of the Just, Overtime. They went through the Ways of the Righteous, the Gates of Repentance. You're going to say, come on, what can I accomplish in 15 minutes one day a week? So you see, from this, they accomplished a lot. There was a great rabbi, made a very special Siyum Shots that he finished the entire time. We did it many times. But for him, this was most special. So they asked him, what's the difference? You finished it twice, 3 times, 5 times. Why is it now more special? He said, this one's more special because this is the time I finished it when I was waiting. I was at a bus stop, right? I'm waiting for buses to come, and learning on the bus. That's when I did it, right? In other words, learn a little bit here, a little bit there, waiting for the bus. You're wasting time, right? So, I take out his Gemara, whatever, and start learning. I don't know how people learn on buses or in cars, they get car sick, whatever, but, okay, but that was more special. Why? Because that was time you say, he used that amount of time, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it is, he used that amount of time, in order to review, right? In order to go through more. And that's what he did, right? So we think, the Avos Chaim says people think, time is money. He said just the opposite. Says time is life. That's what it is. It's life. We're going to get upstairs after 120 years. I already mentioned this in this week's Parsha, that he said a person's going to get upstairs after 120 years. God's going to say one of the first things, either did you learn Torah, right? Or, you're honest in business, right? No question which question comes first, right? But you got to say, of course, I learned as much Torah as I could, even though I work. So God says, yeah, let's see. You bent over backwards, to make a living. You made a good living. Etc. But when it came to learning Torah, you were lazy, right? Essentially, you were lazy.
Slack.
So what comes out of it? comes out of it is that if I had an opportunity to learn and say, no, I need to do this for business, but you really didn't need to, then that's wasting time when you could have learned. Right? So the whole idea, about learning, and other things in general is pointing out, he says, listen, you're gonna bend over backwards, work all these extra hours. When it comes to business, what about me? God says, what about me? What'd you do? You wasted time. Like someone told me, said, yeah, if I'm bored, I got 3 football games to watch today and on Sunday. That's beautiful if you're bored, right? Well, there are plenty of things you could learn, not going to make you bored. Oh, you're not interested? Okay, that's a person's choice, right? But in the end, what do we see? We bend over backwards doing other things we have time for. God says, what? You don't have time for me, right? You waste time doing this. You don't have time for me, right? So this is an interesting dichotomy, right? You got righteous people, growing and growing and growing. And even though they have this pedigree, they reach unbelievable levels. Now, it's good to start at a certain level, true, right? But you can have Bali Tshuva that can reach high spiritual levels as well. And they overcome things, that righteous people don't. So the reality is the righteous people are greater. They are greater even if they don't have those challenges. Because it's much more difficult if I don't have those challenges. Everyone around me is religious, my whole family. I don't have those challenges. You're fighting with family, fighting with your parents, fighting with siblings. They're always making fun of you, different things. You don't have those type of challenges. They don't have, I'm not saying even in, families that have a very strong pedigree. I'm not saying they don't, there aren't disagreements or whatever, right? But when everything around you is all about Torah. It's all about striving. It's all about God in your life. That's a whole different thing. Even when you're dying, you got people to help you, give you chizuk, give you strength, whatever. All kinds of different things. When you're out in the world by yourself, you're out by yourself. People can be extremely cruel, right? Even if they're family, right? But the point is that someone at that level, to keep going at that level, that's an easy thing to do. And even if a person comes back to Judaism, becomes a Noahide, to say, wow, I finally came out of it. Now I see the truth. This is real. This is where the real work starts, right? Now, in other words, now I can't take anything for granted. Now I got to work hard, and I got to be dedicated, and I can't get distracted. We live in a very distracting world.
Oh, for
right?
Sure.
Extremely distracting world, and I'm going to say for the negative, right? In many ways, because it's very easy to take a person away from Torah. We totally get distracted. Not to get political, because we're not going to, right? But you look what happened last week, and what's the whole world talking about? This infiltration of the Capitol building. That's the news, right? Whether they were infiltrated from Antifa, they weren't. Okay, the whole discussion, right? Doesn't really matter. Point, it's a moot point. Yeah, but that's interesting. People riveted, to their tablets, to their TVs, and all the media giving their thing, and he should be impeached, and all these different things. Extremely distracting. Extremely distracting. Sure. Someone would say, "What do I care?" Okay, he lost. They didn't. They ratified it. He's out. Okay, move on. No, he's evil incarnate. He's Mr. S. He deserves to die. It's unbelievable, right? But the point is, it's very easy. People get involved in politics. Get into politics, they get into sports, they get into entertainment, they get all these things. You know what? It's one big distraction. It's a huge distraction. It takes away from the Torah I should be learning. That's what it does, right? A person could have been glued there for hours, see what's going to be, because it's happened in the morning, right? It was already the afternoon, and you go through the whole thing. What happened? The police came and whatever, shut everything down, and there was a curfew. All kinds of things, and waiting for people to speak, and all these different things. And finally, they went back, and they ratified it, they certified it, whatever, But it was the whole thing, So how many hours went by? How many hours went by that people were sitting there glued? Hours. Now I would ask the $1 million question, and people vilifying him, some people defending him, this, that. But the bottom line is that we all have to think about, Jews or not Jews, right? We always have to think, is this beneficial for my soul? Is this going to help me in serving God, yes or no? And for most people, that answer is a dead zero, is no, right? All it does is it gets people cooked up. That's all it does. Whether you're on one side, you're on the other side, it doesn't really matter. You think it was stolen. They say there's no proof. You say we had proof. Nobody looked at it. Whatever. All these different, I said we're not getting political, right? But all these different things, the bottom line is it doesn't do diddly, in my language, doesn't do diddly squat for my service to God. God's going to say, what do you care, right? What do you care one way or the other? Say, what do you mean the republic's at stake? What do you mean? This guy's bad for Jews. Could be very bad for the Jewish people. Could be bad for Israel. That's all true. But you know what? You're not in a position to change anything. I want to tell you something. My Rebbe told me I was very big into Israeli politics years ago. My Rebbe beat it in my head. He said, listen, he said, you have no power to do anything, right? In other words, he asked me, he said, are you happy the way God runs the world? 95% of the time. So I thought about it and I said, yeah. He said, the other 5% of what goes on, you're not going to understand in 5 lifetimes. It doesn't matter. You're not going to understand it. You can't change anything. It's a waste of time. Just go sit and learn. Don't get distracted, right? These things are very distractive, right? They're extremely distractive, and it takes me away from serving God. What does God care? I get all cooked up about this whole thing. No, you can understand. It's going to be bad for Israel. It's going to be bad for the world. Gas prices are going to go up. Oh, he's going to go back to the Iran deal. All these millions. Everything may be true. Maybe 100% true. What does that have to do with me serving God? What does that have to do with making blessings or anything else? Zero. It's a distraction. That's what it is. So, didn't God make the distractions? People made the distractions. He egged it on, right? But he wants you to work in this world, right? What does the Ramchal say in Derech Hashem? You're in this world to struggle, physically, spiritually. That's what you're here for. Whatever you do in this world, that's what you take to the next world, for better or for worse, right? So you're going to say, wow, you made a real interesting world. This was world news. Unbelievable. A coup. Everyone thinks it's a whole coup. The world's coming to an end. We have to stand up. We have to blast them on Twitter. It's an interesting thing, when it comes to freedom of speech. While I'm on this rant, I saw someone post very interesting, this madman in Iran, he's got the right to post on Facebook. He's got the right to post on Twitter, right? President does it. Doesn't that tell you something? I don't care if you disagree with him. I don't care if you think he's a lunatic. He's not this guy in Iran. He's not going to sit there pushing buttons and blow them up, right? He's got half a brain. They're not going to let him do it, right? Even though people are talking about, you got to get him out. What he's going to do in 12 days. But why is it? There's a censorship. There's a censorship going on. You go with the president, you're out. Right? You stay, you go against him, no problem. You say whatever you want. But why does a madman in Iran have the right to say what he wants or not, but he doesn't? That doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense logically. You want to tell me he's less of a madman or they're both equal? You want to tell me he's equal to Hitler? Come on. That's a little bit far. A little bit far to say, right? Regardless of that, we live in a messed up world. We live in a world where we're torn in a million different directions. And God says, you know what? I want you to be the best Torah Jew you can be or the best non-Jew you can be. You have to get rid of the distractions. There are a lot of good distractions. There's a lot of fun out there. I don't think there's any question about it.
I've been to a CFL game, Rabbi.
Well, I can't help you, but I can feel your pain. I can definitely feel your pain. But in general, in general, that's the bottom line. And we're only going to be here for a short amount of time. Doesn't King David say we're going to be here 70 years? Or if we have strength, 80 years. So so if most of that time's been spent on garbage, and watching things and reading things that are not going to help me serving God one way or the other, God's going to say, what do I need you for? Bink. He said, I give you an opportunity. Give you an opportunity to be able to learn my Torah, to learn what I have to do, to be the best non-Jew or Jew you can be. What are you worried about this stuff for? You're not in control. Your vote doesn't even matter anymore. You're not in control. You're totally not in control. You are in control if you want to sit and learn. You have that power. This, however many hours it is, however much time you have, it's very easy to get distracted. Right? So people that were distracted before, now they're holding, the Torah mitzvahs. The point is that someone righteous don't have those same things. They don't have those same distractions. So they're on a higher level if they keep plugging. right? Keep on trucking, right? They keep on trucking and reach higher spiritual levels. They're at an advantage. I don't think there's any question about it. They're at an advantage, but to stay on that level day in and day out and keep growing and keep learning, right? And keep getting to different levels, etc. That's a whole different world.
Sure is.
You know, that's a whole different world. So back to our original thing here.
Can I ask a question, Rabbi, from online?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's just somebody online is asking about, is music a distraction? Can you take a minute just to talk about music, how it can maybe be distracting or how it can be useful? I mean,
well, secular music, that, you know, the lyrics are bad, right? Forget about gangster rap. Most of the lyrics are bad. Most, I'm sure everyone out there is listening to punk rock and gangster rap, but those that are not, and let's just say for argument's sake, the lyrics are clean, which most of them aren't, right? So they're putting certain ideas into your head. Now, if you want to listen, someone says, you know, I like to listen to elevator music, my language, or dentist music, right? Classical music, right? Classical music. It relaxes me. Okay. Right? There's nothing wrong with it, you know, per se.
I was a symphony subscriber.
I feel your pain. I could never imagine that. If I were to hear a symphony, I would think I'm about to get drilled, you know, by a dentist, right? I had to take a music appreciation course, you know, in college and university, and we had to listen to Gregorian chant. That's the only reason I know it. Old church music. That's pretty bad, right? That's pretty bad. And we had an exam on Beethoven's Fifth. You know, up until this day, many years later, I can't even listen to it because we had to know all the ups and all the downs and all the this and all the that. You know, does that make me a better person? No. If a person wants to learn, you know, if a person wants to listen to it, you know, let's say they're not bad lyrics, anything else, just to chill, technically, there's nothing wrong with it. Or I wouldn't say, you know, people like to listen to music while they're doing other things. Right now, you know, if you're listening to music when you should be learning, you know, maybe that's going to be an issue, or maybe you want to just listen to it to chill and be able to learn, whatever. Again, if the lyrics are bad, you know, then that's a problem.
Stay away.
You know, then you have to stay away, right? Even for a non-Jew, because, you know, I would say it's a moral imperative. You don't want to hear people cursing and different innuendos and all that. Forget music videos; that'd be totally forbidden, right? In general, just because of sexual nature in general. But even so, it's just a relaxing thing, and all things being equal, the lyrics aren't bad. So then, you know, then it shouldn't be, you know, if it's like dentist music or whatever, you know, what do you call it, classical music, something like that, you know, it shouldn't be an issue. Now, I would say one thing, you know, that is, you know, there are people that, you know, like to listen to Wagner, right? Wagner was a rabid anti-Semite. So, you know, you can say, I don't care if he's a rabid anti-Semite. I like his music, right? They can say, you know, I like to watch this basketball player, but he's totally immoral. Or he sucker punched his girlfriend and now he's not playing in the NFL. Or, you know, they caught that on video or whatever, right? You can say, I don't care what the person does. I like the way he shoots a ball, right? I like the way he throws a football, right? But again, we don't compartmentalize, right? Just because the person throws a football and shoots a basketball and a person wants to, I don't know, idolize them at a certain level, you know, who says that's a good thing, right? Because then you're saying what they morally do is acceptable. You can say, I didn't say that. You say, I totally never said that. I just like the way they shoot a ball, right? But, you know, people say, wow, I like to watch this, you know, this boxer, you know, it's unbelievable. You know, problem is he's a rapist, got convicted, went to jail, right? So you're going to say, it doesn't matter. I like to see him box, right? But again, you know, we don't compartmentalize. We don't say, you know, this thing is bad, but I like it anyway. You know, it doesn't really matter. You know, take the famous Aristotle. Aristotle is known to be a tremendous womanizer. You know, and his students caught him doing different things. They said, how could the great Aristotle be doing this? So he said, there's the great Aristotle does these things. Great Aristotle, the philosopher, right? And what would Judaism say? No, you're immoral.
The whole package.
I don't care how much you know. And you know, you're sick in the head. Right? It doesn't matter how great a philosopher you are. You go beyond the, you know, what you should do. You know, what is forbidden to do. So I don't care how much knowledge you have. Right? How much knowledge you have is irrelevant. Because the question is, does this go against what God wants or not? If it does, then what does intelligence matter? Right? Actually, I spoke, what whatever. I did a video, on that as well. I think last week, a few weeks ago, made a video. Basically, that was the question. Does intelligence help you or doesn't when it comes to mitzvah observance, right? So he'd say, well, if the majority of people, there are only, let's say 10 billion people in the world, if you say 1%, right? That's how I looked this up. I think there are like 10 billion people in the world. So if you say 1%, right? What's 10% of 10 billion is 1 billion, right? What's 1% of that's 100 million, right? You're talking 100 million, 1 in 100 million. You want to tell me 100 million people, let's say of that 1% that they have an IQ over 120. 120 is like genius, right? So let's say between 100 and 120, right? Out of 100 million people, it's less than 1%. So of that, let's say 10 million. Let's say out of that 10 million people, how many of them are holding by Torah mitzvahs at any level? So how many Orthodox Jews exist in the world? About 1 million, right? That at least keep Shabbos properly. It said that we consider them really Orthodox. Let's say 1 million, right? How many non-Jews come out of Christianity that are Noahites? 10,000? 50,000? Come on, people tell me they're 50,000 Karaites. I don't know where they are, right? So how many Noahites are there out there in the world? Come on, you would know this.
We're growing, Rabbi. We're growing.
I understand.
Keep sharing. Keep sharing.
50? 100? Let's say 10,000. I don't think it's 10,000, right? I think it's a lot less than that. But okay, so let's say it's 10,000. Let's say it's 100,000. Just haven't found them all. Let's say it's 100,000. All right, 100,000. We're talking about 1 million, right? 1 million that have an IQ between 100 and 120, right? So if you take all those people, how many of them are holding by Torah mitzvahs? 10%? That's 100,000. You got 100,000 non-Jews out there holding by Torah mitzvahs at their level? No, there aren't. Right? They're not. They're involved in Christianity, involved in other things, etc. So I would take a much higher number, right? Take 1 million, take 10 million, whatever it is. So we're all these people. We're all these people that want to do morally what the Torah says, right? Of all these geniuses, right? So they'll convince themselves of all kinds of things which aren't true, right? Totally not true. You got to say, well, intelligence, they can just make excuses. Right? A 5-year-old dresses up as Napoleon. Right? I think I've used this parable before. Dresses up as Napoleon. He's got this funny hat, this coat, whatever. Right? Starts speaking a little bit of French. And he says, I'm Napoleon. He's like, come on, your name is Beryl, you're not Napoleon. So you take someone who's 30. Right? Take someone who's 30, wears this funny hat, has got this suit, starts speaking in French and all that. And he says, I'm Napoleon. Said, no, I think you're schizophrenic. He said, no, I'm Napoleon. He says, don't tell anyone. Incognito. He says, incognito. Right? So what's the point? Point is you can have someone intelligent, extremely intelligent, and just make up things and have their own philosophy and their own philosophical outlook based on zero. But because they're more intelligent, they can cover it up. They can answer up, different things. So even if you tell me 10 million, 10 million people have this high IQ, where are they? How come they're not listening to me right now? Where are they? It's because you yell and scream and you mentioned Trump. That's why they're not listening. Okay, but where are they? Where are all these people? And the answer is that they're fools. Why are they fools? Because they're into other things or they're just into their own self. Right? It's what the Greeks brought to the world, worship of the body. Right? And it doesn't matter how intelligent they are. That, as I heard a great rabbi once say, I'd love to send my kids to university. Let me see them come out more moral than when they went in. So even with university today and whatever they produce doctors, lawyers, cream of the crop. I was there by the top 1% of college students. Wasn't so impressive. I mean, some of them, were really bright or whatever, but they were doing the same things I saw people doing in high school. Drugs, immorality, all kinds of other things. Like Ravicta Miller, a blessed memory, would say, there's a lot of things you can take up in university, like narcotics, booze and women, right? Not necessarily in that order. People that are getting education to a certain extent, right? They just want to finish and, get a nice job, whatever the case. Not about knowledge for knowledge's sake. It doesn't, that almost doesn't exist. There are some people like that. Doesn't exist. I don't want to, I don't want to digress. The point is why aren't all these people moral? You take Bertrand Russell, famous Bertrand Russell, totally immoral, but he taught that ethics. So a student said, how could you be so immoral and teach ethics? He said, what? Taught mathematics, expect me to be a square. Right? That doesn't fly in Judaism. In other words, what you learn, you have to keep at a high level. As high level as you can. Right? It's not about compartmentalization. Compartmentalization goes out the door. Right? It totally goes out the door. That doesn't work. Right? You can't, there's no justification. I mean, you could have, smart people say, well, I'm just doing this incognito. They just cover it up. They totally cover it up and make up excuses. That's all it is. Right? Like they'll say about euthanasia. No, that's not murder. Why is that murder? That's mercy killing. I'm showing mercy. Right? It's a good example. They'll say, I'm showing mercy. This person's suffering. They're, even if they're not in the coma, they're pretty much like a vegetable and they can't move and they're in pain. I'm doing a good thing by pulling them off the plug. I'm doing a good thing that they end up, losing their lives. Right? That's mercy. But we hold that, life is precious. And, you're not allowed to kill somebody. You're not allowed to take someone off the respirator. Under certain circumstances, you'd be allowed to. Right? But in general, it should be forbidden. So we don't make any difference between someone who does that and someone who shoots someone in the head. It's the same thing. What are you talking about? Leaving them alive? That's cruel. They're just going to be a vegetable. They don't have a place in the world. And they're dictating and playing God. That's what they're doing. They're saying, I know better than the creator of the world. The creator of the world gives life. The creator of the world takes life. Right? Who gives you the right? Because you don't have any idea. I mentioned this before. There was a doctor. The family said, pull the plug. They pull the plug on the patient. And the patient dies. Comes back to the doctor. The soul of that patient comes back to the doctor. Because I heard the story from the doctor himself. And the patient screaming at him said, you murdered me. You killed me. I was just waiting to go to paradise. I was only there a few more days. And now I'm suffering in hell. And you're going to pay. And you're a murderer. He had this dream a few times. And eventually became an Orthodox Jew. Now you think about that. You see somebody on a respirator. They're not there. Right? You go, dude, they're not there. There's nobody home.
The lights are on, no one's home. Yeah.
They're in a coma. We don't fathom what's going on in their mind, but they're in a coma. Right? But the person's very much alive. They're still alive. There's a story, someone got in a terrible accident, in the early 20s, and basically was paralyzed, was in a coma and all that. I don't know, paralyzed, whatever, was in a coma. And parents didn't know what to do. Parents were thinking of, pulling the plug. Meanwhile, the person there was like, no. He's like screaming, don't do it, but they couldn't hear him. He was in a coma. So what happened? Eventually, he came out of it. They didn't kill him. Thank God he came out of it. But he said he saw everything. He heard everything. He just couldn't move. His soul saw everything. Right? Again, this I heard from the person himself. So, there's a lot more of what we see than what we see. So here now, the soul is suffering in the next world because the doctor pulled the plug based on what the family wanted. So they're going to say, even if he comes out of it, it's going to be a vegetable. Again, this idea of quality of life. And this comes up a lot because, someone, even before they go to hospice or they're sick, they might try and convince them, just to do very little because they're not going to live anyway. Not going to have quality of life. And there are many stories of people saved their loved ones, gave them extra years of life and got them out of the hospital they were in because they wanted to kill them. They want to take, you're taking up space. You're not going to live anyway. So you might as well just do this and do that. That's the world we live in. That is the world we live in. So who gives them the right, the way we see it, who gives them the right to play God over here? Who gives them the right to say what they want, over here and kill people? They don't have the right to. That's murder. Right? But again, what are the doctors going to say? What are the psychologists going to say? Quality of life. Who is determining quality of life? Why do they think they have the ability to do that? Just because they have an advanced degree. And what they claim, so to speak. Yeah, they know more than you. That's true. But they take out the God factor. And they take out the soul factor, and they take out life factor, because they're only looking at it from their perspective, and they're saying that's not quality of life, right? And they'll convince the patient it's not quality of life, and based on that, they'll kill people, right? These people will deteriorate. That'll be it. So people will say, so how to get onto that? Because people will say, oh, look, they have all this knowledge. And they're defining, what life and death is. They're defining this is really mercy, right? I know somebody that a person had a pacemaker, dying anyway, and they said, no, he's suffering too much, and they cut the pacemaker. So what happened? He died, right? Patient died, within 2 hours. So I asked the doctor, I said, patient was going to die anyway. All right, but the patient would have lasted 6 to 8 hours. So what did they do? They hasten the death. That's murder. So what people think in their misguided, stupid, small minds, they're saying we know what quality of life is. This is really mercy. But if you know how the soul works, and you know what life and death is really about, according to what the Torah says, then you shouldn't open your mouth, because that goes against what God wants. There are certain times where you're not going to hasten a person's death, right? In other words, if someone was jackhammering and the person really could have died, but there's too much noise, you tell them to stop jackhammering, right? That you're allowed to do, right? But you're not allowed to cut a person's life short. That you're not allowed to do in general, right? These are not questions for me. I'm just speaking in generality, right? But we have to be able to look at things, and this is what we do here, is looking at the ethics behind what the Torah says, right? It's not about what I think, because nobody cares what I think. It's irrelevant what I think. It's what the Torah says. We have to put our minds into what the Torah, but I think this is bad against women. I think it's bad against non-Jews. Well, let's look. Let's understand. Put your mind aside. Put your 21st century mind aside. And let's analyze. What does it say over here? What does the text tell me? Yeah, it does look pretty bad, right? I did a number of videos on Tanakh Talk. You can look over there, right, about, unbelievable statements against non-Jews. And the Talmud say, oh, so much against non-Jews. So what did I say? One of the first videos, you have to look at the context, right? Before you open your mouth and say, oh, I think this and I think that, what is the context? What is it talking about? Right? Then understand the psyche behind what the rabbis say. Once you see what it's talking about, and the Messianics are very good at this, Christians are very good. Oh, the Talmud's from Satan and this. Look at all these statements. Look at all these negative statements. Yeah, let's analyze. let's analyze what the statements mean. Right? Even if the Talmud says X, doesn't necessarily mean we do it 100%. Could be the way the commentaries say no. Right? This is not allowed. You're not allowed to do this. Or whatever. But if you don't understand the context, which most people don't, that's why they pick and choose what they say. But what do? They take things totally out of context. And they say, oh, this is a terrible thing. Of course it's a terrible thing the way you look at it, because you're taking it totally out of context. If I see it in context, and you say, oh, that doesn't make sense. Oh, whatever. You have to analyze what it is, what's going on. Right? Why is it that, X, Y, you're not going to get into that, right? It's not the purpose, right? But the idea is if you miss it, if you take it out of context, of course you're not going to understand it. Of course there are many things that look bad, right? That certainly look bad on us. How the rabbis could say this, and how could God want this, and all these different things. I agree. But if you don't understand the context, you don't have a question.
Wow.
You have to see in the
context.
What hope
do we have?
Even if you see the context, people could say, oh, this is terrible, and this is that. You got to understand it. You got to lay yourself down a little bit, see what these great rabbis know 10 times more than you do, right? You have to understand where it's coming from. Once you understand where it's coming from, you understand the context, then we can have a discussion. But before that, there's no discussion, because you're coming out of left field, and you're quoting something.
Been doing that
you're quoting something saying, oh, this doesn't make sense. Okay, did you research it? Did you look into it? Did you understand the context? No, but it makes no sense. So what's the point of having discussion? There's no dialogue. There's no dialogue. So I just think it's stupid. I see this all the time. People say things. I think this is stupid, and I can't believe that. That's why I'm not Orthodox. Okay. Yeah, but you don't understand what it is. Because if you understood what it is, you wouldn't have a question. And maybe there are things in Judaism are hard to understand. And you have to understand it's a godly book as well. But you really think this is what God wants? Duh, I don't think so. I think that's what he wants. Right? So you have to make sense out of it. There are people who have issues. There are people going to, have issues with certain things. Okay, but I think a lot of the issues have to do with the fact that they're not willing to look at what the context is.
The depth, yeah.
And they just want to destroy anything that the rabbis say for one very simple reason. And that's because they want to do what they want to do. Say, I don't have to hold by this. Oh, come on, this is antiquated. This is medieval. This is this is that. And the rabbis are a bunch of misogynists. And they hate women. They hate non-Jews. They hate pedophiles. Well, maybe it's not a bad thing. They hate pedophiles, right? Whatever. All these different things. If you're lacking the context of what's going on, go understand it. Go try and get your puny brain around it to see why they say what they say. Then we can have a discussion. But if you don't have a clue why they say what they say, you just take it out of context. What's my obligation to even answer you? Right? What's my obligation to even get involved? There's no point. There's 0 point. And
that's the reason.
Yeah, go ahead.
I said no. That's the reason why I really wanted to do this series. This Pirkei Avos. I think the world needs to hear more of it, and it's you can't have that discussion unless you're coming from the right perspective. And I think this entire when I started to turn towards, leaving Christianity and turn towards, I started by looking, I said, okay, well, I should be able to read their ethics of the fathers up to a certain stage. And I started, to say, well, maybe these biblical or maybe these Christian characters read up to this and read and understood that. But the reality is, the more I started to look, the more I started to realize, wow, there's something deep here. This is, and even
again,
just what I could grasp.
Has an agenda. Right? So the Messianics, the Christians, going to certainly want to make us look bad in order to pursue their agenda. Right? They're going to say, I can't, I see someone all the time, they're Hebrew roots. So they're all about, rejecting the rabbis and, and this and the rabbis this and the rabbis that, and this is the reference to JC and this is the reference, and they're going to fry. And okay, you don't hold of what the rabbis say. Right? You don't hold what the rabbis say. Okay. Right, I get it, but what you're proving doesn't prove anything. It's certainly not.
Like
this
your
is
checkmate maneuver showed them straight.
And this is yeah, right. This is a reference to this. Well, we obviously don't hold that. We obviously hold that. He wasn't around for 600 years, so can't be talking about him, right? Or it was 600 years after the fact, or it's a historical inaccuracy, or it's a mistranslation. Oh, that's your opinion. You're right, because we're based on 3,000 years of, of it. That's all we have. So they say, they're wrong. They're this, they're that. You don't hold by oral law. There's no discussion. There's no discussion. Right? So that's what, so over here, right, back to this idea where Bali Tshuva stands, a righteous person cannot stand. So here, what does the soul want? You have a struggle between body and soul. The body wants to go after the physical. The soul wants to go after everything spiritual. Now, comes along the Ramchal in Derech Hashem, in the way of God, and he says that what happens when the soul goes in the body? Very simple. The soul comes from God's heavenly throne. Right? God puts the soul in every body that's, that he feels this is the way it's going to reach its true potential, for whatever reason. So God now breathes in the spirit of life, gives the person life. Right? And what happens? So that soul, if it's that powerful, goes into the body, should destroy the body. Right? That's how powerful the soul is. But what happens? Soul goes in the body, and the body's opaque. Right? The body comes from impurity, comes from this world. If it comes from this world, what does it do? It traps the soul. Totally 100% traps the soul. Once it traps the soul, how is the soul going to shine? It's not going to shine the way it should, as if in the spiritual world. It has to be nourished in this world. In other words, you have to do Torah. You have to keep Torah mitzvahs, even for non-Jews. You want to strengthen that soul? That's what you got to do. If you go after the physical, it's going to weaken the soul. So there's always a struggle, right? There's going to be a struggle from the time a person's born till the time they die, it's going to be a struggle between the physical and the spiritual. So if the person does the right thing, so he uplifts the body and the soul. If he does the wrong thing, he degrades the body and the soul. So there's always this constant struggle. So now comes along the soul that there's a struggle, and the soul can be maybe convinced by the body to do things that it shouldn't.
Not.
Right? In other words, the soul may want to transgress even mitzvahs that make logical sense. Right? In other words, even if it makes logical sense, you come up with different reasons why I shouldn't have to keep it. Right? You can say, of course, the Torah says, or let's say in general, I would never murder anyone. Right? I can never murder anyone. God forbid anyone should ever murder anyone. They would agree to that. Right? Now you ask them, okay, you have a loved one who's a vegetable, or they're in a coma, and they've been in a coma for a while. Doctors say, listen, there's no hope. Back. We need other beds. They're taking up space. Let's call it a day. Right? So the person will say, I did it for them. I pulled the plug, they died. Right? I did it for them. So now, as difficult as a decision as that may be, again, in cases where it's totally forbidden, right? You don't have that right. We hold that's 100% murder.
100%.
Right? That's forbidden. That's murder. Now you just said before that, how could I ever murder somebody? So you'll say this isn't murder. This is not. See, this is where the discussion goes. They'll say this isn't murder. Why isn't it murder? This is mercy. I'm saving them from added pain, right? I'm saving them from added pain, but we hold that's murder, right? So over here, even something makes logical sense. They could be convinced otherwise, right? To give in to this inclination, right? So about tshuva over here, what do his desires tell them, or her? These desires tell them, yeah, go back and eat shrimp. Go back and watch the CFL. Go back and listen to bad music. Whatever it is. And you're going to have an inclination to want to do that. Why? Because that's what you did before. And it's enjoyable. It's not like these things are terrible. God's going to say, I want you to eat bran your whole life. What do you mean eat bran? Like, come on. No chocolate? No chocolate. You're gonna say, where's the fun over here? You have a desire to eat chocolate, right? And God said, no, you can eat bran. So you have certain inclinations that you've already given into, that you've already done, day in and day out. It's much harder to fight. It's part of you now. It's part of your soul. So in that sense, I could say, since they have those inclinations, which we mentioned, right, this person doesn't have that. They totally don't have that. So when you're struggling day in and day out not to do this, not to do that, so in that sense, about tshuva is greater, right? Because because he has these trials, right? But someone who doesn't have the desire to transgress in general. So normally we say, according to the level of work a person puts in, the greater the reward, right? We call that lefit sar agra, right? According to the amount of effort, that's the reward you're going to get. Now, all the more so, again, we're not talking necessarily things that are very stringent. We're not talking about necessarily stringent transgressions, right? Let's say that the soul has a desire to steal, right? Or to be immoral, or something like that. We're not even talking something as great. That's bad. No one's gonna disagree. That's pretty severe, right? So therefore, if it's something like that, I would say, oh, look how much reward that the soul is going to be, because it's going to prevent themselves from doing that. So therefore, the greater the soul capability, the greater the temptation, right? Didn't we mention that, about an hour ago? We said that that the greater the person's soul, the greater their temptation is going to be. Right? So therefore, when they prevent themselves from transgressing, what's the reward? The reward is that we can't imagine, because we're talking about something pretty severe. In other words, if they have tremendous soul capability, then what they possibly do not transgress, so that multiplies by infinity. If they're on a lower level, now the question is how this gets measured. A person's on a lower level, the struggle, is not going to be to continue to learn more and more in depth. The struggle is going to be to stay away from speaking badly against others. The struggle is going to be not looking at the sports scores. Now you're going to say, come on, is that really a struggle? For some people, it would be a struggle. Right? Someone never had the intent, never had the enjoyment. Okay. Here, you live in a city, a sports town stinks, it never goes anywhere. Okay. If you're in a place where, the sports team is always good, so it's tempting, right? Definitely tempting. But someone does not have that temptation, right? You say they should be on a lower level, right? But their temptation could be another thing, right? Depending on the source of the soul.
Never walk in another
and how great the soul is the greater the temptation. So therefore, in general, we would say Baalei Tshuva are greater because they need the strength to fight against the evil inclination. They need the strength to fight against, be in bad situations and family situations where, they have to stand up for Torah and all they do is get made fun of. Right. And, and they have to do their best to show respect, be respectful and all these different things, when the reality is they just want to take a sledgehammer, right? Or a Louisville slugger, my language, take a baseball bat and smack people. Why? Because they don't understand. They don't care. And all they do is sit there and make fun. Right? So a righteous person doesn't necessarily go through that. He's not gonna have that temptation at all, right? When it comes to family in general. Right? And Baal Tshuva has much more to fight against. Much, much more to fight against. And in a certain sense, they're greater, right? Because they have much more to fight against. But the reality is that someone, is born into a righteous family or an observant family, to stay on that same path, even without these temptations, could be other temptations, other different things at their level. It's harder, right? It's harder to keep going on that same path. Right, I've heard people say, well, in your case, meaning, let's say my kids is like, did you ever, want to eat shrimp? Did you ever, break the rules? I don't know why you'd ask such a question, but okay. Let's say someone asks the question. They're brought up in a certain way. Does that mean they're perfect? No. Does that mean they don't make mistakes? No. Could they be severe mistakes? Could be. Right? The pull of the street is very strong. Right? I don't think there's any question. So, they also have temptation. But they, what does the other person want to say? Oh, see, they make mistakes. They do things. They're not perfect. So I don't have to do anything. Well, that's one thing has nothing to do, with another, I know that they're making fun, and they say, oh, did you ever want to eat pepperoni pizza? Did you ever want to do these things? If they've never been exposed to it, why should they want to? Why in the world would they want to? I won't say that, let's say watching videos or movies, that's not a temptation. Certainly kids have that temptation. Especially if you say, wow, I can't watch this, can't watch that, can't watch the other thing, and it has a negative effect, which we know what the negative effect is, a tremendously negative effect, like anything else can be addictive, right? So, can Orthodox kids get into that? Yes. Can they be led astray like that? Yes.
Technology, sure.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. But why would you even ask that? Right? Why is it, does everyone have struggles? Religious struggles? Yeah. Right? But the thing is, once you drive a wedge in there, you say, you're doing it for God and this and that, you're going to get punished anyway. What would be the point? Just do what you want. Why do you have to listen to your parents? Why do you have to listen to your community? Right? So the point I made was, no one's putting a gun to our head over here. Yeah, we are taught many things. Kids are taught many things from when they're younger. To share, not to steal, not to speak badly against others. That wouldn't go in public school. That's the norm, right? A lot of these things, would be the norm in other places. But, it doesn't mean people are perfect, by any stretch. But, there are rules. Yesh din v'yesh dayan. There's there are judgments. There's a judge, right? Sorry, there are laws, and there's a judge, and if you don't like it, too bad.
Order. Yeah, order for a reason.
If the Torah says many times you're not allowed to intermarry, okay, so give me a reason why it's permissible. No, it's not for that generation. It's not for, no, I'm going to do what I want to do. Okay, but the Torah says you're wrong. And I hold by what the Torah says. So by definition, I hold what you're doing is wrong. Oh, people don't want to hear that. People don't want to hear, oh, you're judging me. Okay, so you have a problem with God. God's anti-pig, right? God's anti-camel. God's anti a lot of things. Okay. But the question is the Torah true? Does it make sense? Right? And what's the person going to say? I don't care if it makes sense or not. This is what I'm doing. And you can't tell me otherwise. Okay, I got ample evidence. I can speak for the next 3 hours, which won't let me do. Right? But I got ample evidence to prove it beyond the shadow of a doubt.
All right,
listen?
let's hear it.
The proof? And what are people going to say? No. I want to live my life. I don't care about the proof. Proof doesn't interest me. And you can go to hell and it doesn't really matter, but you have to accept it. Why do I have to accept it? Torah says it's forbidden. Right? You want to put me in a corner and say I have to accept what I believe is wrong. You don't have any morals or scruples, okay? Right? Oh, that's not true. I do have morals. There are plenty of things I wouldn't do, but you're a fanatic. Okay, I'm a fanatic, but I have ample proof here why it's true. If you don't want to listen to the proof, right? What does that say? That says you want to do what you want to do, right? Yeah, question.
Well, Rabbi, more and more these day and age, I get a lot of people try to insist there is no proof. There is no confirmable extreme evidence. Everything's relative. And we hear this often. And you see a lot of people going down veins that, are not correct, but they
listen.
I like the way you put it. Just do what they want to do.
Not to get political. All these court cases that were thrown out, they didn't look at the evidence. They're all technicalities.
Were they allowed lawfully?
They didn't look at the evidence.
I don't think they were allowed to lawfully.
Doesn't matter. But everyone's claiming, look, they had no evidence. That's all they said. The other
they
side,
had no lawful evidence.
No evidence.
Big difference.
They didn't look at the evidence.
Yeah.
There's no jurisdiction. We don't have jurisdiction. We don't have this. Yeah, they didn't want to do it. State legislatures didn't want to get involved.
Yeah.
Right? Because they overturned it. They've been burning every city down. That's why.
Well,
but don't tell me there's no evidence. They have plenty of evidence. Plenty of affidavits.
Lawful,
right.
different
and
story.
anyone gives an affidavit, if you're lying, you go to jail. That's called perjury. 101. Right? So if there's evidence, you can look the other way and say, there's no evidence here. We don't see any evidence here. Right?
Sky's blue. No, it's not.
That's what all the leftists say. There's no evidence. They didn't prove any evidence. Look at all the things thrown out. Why'd they get them thrown out? Technicalities. Not because of the evidence. Because if they show the evidence, people going to jail. That's what's going to happen. People going to jail. And if there's transparency, and they want transparency, they want people to think that voting is real, so let them check the systems. What are they afraid of? No, we're not going to do that. We're not going to let you do that. You don't have a right to do that. What you're doing isn't constitutional. Come on, there's a lot of evidence. Right? Just like over here.
Sweep it under the carpet,
to show God exists. There's a lot of evidence to show the Torah is true. There's a lot of evidence to say I'm not allowed to pick and choose. That's what we started with. Right? You're not allowed to pick and choose. A lot of evidence. Doesn't fit my world outlook. Well, you know what? I care less about your world outlook. Question is, did God give the Torah on Mount Sinai? Yes or no? If he didn't give the Torah on Mount Sinai, that's a different discussion. But you can't say there's no evidence. You can. It just sounds stupid. Because there's ample evidence out there. Shows that God exists. That there's a world of design. That the Torah is true. And why all these other so-called books, religions are not true. Plenty of evidence. You know what? You didn't look at the evidence. You didn't even watch the movie. You didn't even watch the movie. So what are you saying? No one's arguing. No one's arguing that there's no evidence. What are they arguing? I want to do what I want to do. You're not going to tell me elsewhere.
Yeah,
Elsewhere.
I'll call it whatever I want.
They're going to say, I'm going to, doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
What you're saying is irrelevant. And, it's kind of annoying. But they'll say what you're saying is irrelevant. It doesn't speak to me. It's not my world outlook. I'm not going to change.
That's closing your ears,
does
isn't
not negate the fact that the Torah is true and that there's reward and punishment. Right?
Course.
That's a big mistake. That's a huge mistake. Because you don't have what to offer. Right? I'm not interested. That's not the same thing. You're not arguing on the same platform. Right? That's why I make the argument moot. Right? Because if they want truth and they want to know, I'm agnostic. Right? I love hearing this. I'm agnostic. What is an agnostic? An agnostic means they have doubts about God's existence. They're not sure. Okay. So in the last 20 years, how much have you really thought about it? Zero. Have you looked into it? No. Right? They'll probably admit it. Probably never looked into it. Thought about it for a few seconds. I'm not sure. Right? I'm not sure God exists or not. I'm not really sure. Okay, it's nice. Right? Maybe there are certain things you can look at that maybe might make you more sure. Or maybe less sure. No, I'm not looking. No, I'm still thinking about it. You know when they're going to think about it till they die. They're not intellectually honest. They're not looking for an answer because the answer is going to disqualify them. The answer is going to tell them that they lived their life as a travesty of a mockery of a sham. That's what it's going to show. And you're a fanatic. Okay, I'm a fanatic. You want to see the information? I got a lot of information. A lot of information. You want to look at the information? So what can I do? It's like talking to a brick, but you can't say you don't have the information. You can't say you don't have evidence if you never looked at it, right? And again, one of my personal pet peeves, is people who lie and fraud, right? Most people know it's something I can't stand. So, you want to say there's no evidence? I got evidence to show. You want to see it? No. I just want you to sit down, be quiet, and let life go on. That's what they're saying. That's exactly what they're saying. Doesn't matter. Fraud, not fraud. You didn't prove it because we never had a chance. Nobody wanted to look at it. Same thing over here.
You're honest, though. As if the onus.
Someone doesn't want to look at the information. And they're going to say, oh, you're in a cult. You know what a cult is? You want to get definitions here? No. But as people make statements to make statements, right? Let's finish up this Mishnah. The last part of the Mishnah commands that we do God's will even when things are not included in the mitzvah. Meaning, person has to listen to them, right? To the will of what their Father in heaven tells you. And you do that, God's going to take care of you. Now, it doesn't mean we don't have trials. Doesn't mean we don't have tribulations. But you're doing what the command says. Forget about, oral law, not oral law. You do what God says. Now, since we are considered sons to God, we have an obligation to serve, as we say every day, to serve God with great joy. So we're not going to worry about what we have to do or the repercussions. Why not? Because you're doing it for the sake of God. And God's going to answer measure for measure and add onto the world, onto this reward of this great spiritual influence that's going to have an effect on us. Now, that doesn't mean, let's say a person, person works for somebody and they say, listen, I have to leave early on Friday. I can't work on Shabbos. So I'm willing to come in after Shabbos, say during the winter, or on Sunday, or whatever it is, and the person says no. Right? So technically, you live in a country where there is religious freedom, so that goes against your religious beliefs. Right? So you could technically, sue them or, go after them. They don't have a right to fire you, because of that.
Right.
So a person would say, well, if I'm keeping Shabbos, right, and my obligation is to keep Shabbos, then how could I ever lose? If I keep Torah mitzvahs, right, how could I ever lose? So the reality is you're not losing over here. You're on the downside in a certain way, but you're upholding what God says, right? I had something, I was in South America where a person gave rabbinic supervision to wine. Right? I think I mentioned this before. And he had people there watching the wine that didn't keep Shabbos. Now, if they didn't keep Shabbos, they have the status of a non-Jew. A non-Jew can't watch the wine. To make it kosher for a number of different reasons. And they were selling wine that technically wasn't kosher. Right? So I asked my Rebbe what to do. He said, you have to call it in. He said, you can't have someone, making money off a non-kosher wine and calling it kosher. So I didn't take it as far as I did, but I did say something to the kashrus organization, and I ended up losing my job because of it. Now, that being the case, and I couldn't stay there much longer because I couldn't leave my kids in the school, whatever, there are a lot of different issues. But in the end, I was supposed to be there for 2 years. I was there for 6 months. They couldn't wait to get rid of me. But you can obviously not imagine why, right? But in the end, right, the question is, okay, so what happened over here? You did the right thing, meaning me, right? I called this in.
Cost you a lot, yeah.
Right? I didn't go as far as I should have, for sure, but I called it in. But it cost me. Now it cost me my job. And I was in the middle of a Spanish-speaking country. My kids, whatever, So, I ended up leaving, went to New Jersey. And whatever, things worked out how they worked out. But someone's going to ask the question, so what happened over here? Why'd you get slammed over here? So if I would have researched what I really should have done, I wouldn't have taken the job in the first place. But God has his ways, and I certainly have no idea why I had to go out there in general. That's one part of my life I'll never understand. I didn't accomplish anything there. I don't know what the purpose was. Unless it was just to get me out of Israel, to get me somewhere, then to get me back to America. I don't know. I don't know exactly what the purpose was. Point is that was that was a pretty low moment, we'll say. But how can it be? You stick up for Torah and you lose.
Mm-hmm.
Now this could have been a tremendous test over here for a lot of different, for a lot of different things. And in the end, we may not understand why we go through certain things. And it may mean that, we're down, and the chips are down. But that, it could be just you made a bad decision, right? Going to such a place probably was a bad decision. I mean, if I would have known what I know or what I knew after the fact, okay, I wouldn't have gone there. But, it could be just a bad decision, on my end. But even so, when a person sticks up for Torah, you shouldn't lose. So in the end, the question is, okay, what did you gain? What did you learn? What did, you lose some aspect, right? But you gain in other ways, right? You definitely gain in other ways. So, you can say, wow, there are people that keep Torah mitzvahs and they suffer. People have difficulty with, livelihood, people, health-wise, many stories I get with people who convert or want to convert, and they go through all kinds of terrible things. I had somebody started my class, probably the best students I ever had. And a few weeks after they start my classes, fridge goes. After that, washing machine goes. Then there's something wrong with the car. So they contact me, they say, Rabbi, does this always happen with your students? I said at some point, but just for you, it happened a little bit earlier. Why? Because God wants to see who's real or not, right? He's going to grind them. And he's going to want to see if they're going to do the right thing. If they want to convert, that they have to be, they have to be strong. They have to move to a Jewish community, try and get their kids into a Jewish school, which isn't easy, right? Most communities will not accept non-Jewish kids, which makes sense. Even if they're going in the right direction, they don't necessarily want them because they don't want the influence. They don't want, if they're already converted, it's one thing. Right? But there are schools that will accept people. There are people who go out of their minds. Why won't the school accept my kid? Right? My answer is, why should they? They don't want all non-Jews in their school. Or some non-Jews coming from left field. Totally out of left field. Things that your kids say or do, go against, the main theme of the school. It doesn't matter if they're learning, they're a work in progress. They don't want to see that. They're not interested. They don't want the influence. If a person's, again, different schools do different things. Not all schools will reject non-Jews. A lot of them will. right? And the reason is very simple, because they don't want the influence. They absolutely don't want the influence. And I know somebody that their kids were in a Jewish school. The Jewish school accepted them. They had no play dates.
They what?
They just had no play dates because, okay, they're in the process of conversion, but who says they're going to finish, right? Even though they were there for a while, there's no guarantee, right? The parents have an absolute right to guard the kids from your kid. I mean, it sounds terrible. You say, well, I'm educating the best I can. Well, it's not good enough. You can say, well, because they weren't born Jewish? Because they have different values. Let people understand. You have different values. Well, how am I going to learn to get Jewish values? Okay, you're going to have to learn. You got to figure out what to do with your kids, right? If they don't accept them, right? But there is good reason. They're not just doing it to discriminate against non-Jews, right? There are schools that will not take them for a good reason. People say it's not fair. What am I supposed to do with these kids? I get it. But my question is why should they take them? Right, one of the criteria going into a school is being Jewish. So you're not Jewish, but I'm doing everything I can. That's not good enough by some people, by some schools. That might be a harsh reality, and too bad, because they have an absolute right. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. They have a right. Some schools that will accept, okay, but some won't. And you have to understand why they won't. So here the Talmud, Brachos 35b, tells us in the time the Jewish people are doing the will of God. When the Jewish people are doing the will of God, they don't need to work hard. Why don't they need to work hard? Because if they're really doing what God wants at a certain level, then the work will be done by others. In other words, they'll have livelihood. Not going to be a problem. Others will do the work for them. Right? But what are the, if we don't do that, if we're not doing the will of God properly, then it doesn't work that way. In other words, we're going to have to work ourselves, and we're going to have to work to the bone, to make a living, which is what we see today, right? Some people have it easier, some people don't. Whatever it is, that if we're not doing what we're supposed to do, we're going to have to work. It comes on Tosfos, one of the commentaries on the Talmud, and he asks, but what about the second paragraph of the Shema? Second paragraph of the Shema that we say, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, right? That Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. We take on the yoke of heaven, then the yoke of mitzvahs. And what does the second paragraph tell me? It tells me if I keep the mitzvahs, everything's good. I'll get rain, no problem. If not, it's going to be bad, right? It's definitely going to be bad if I don't keep, the Jewish people don't keep what they're supposed to do. It comes on Tosfos and asks, what does the second paragraph say? It says, if you don't keep my mitzvahs, right? If you don't keep my mitzvahs, you won't have rain. You won't have food. If so, if we're really doing God's will, why is it that we have to put our best foot forward and the work won't be done by others? In other words, if you tell me I'm not doing God's will, I understand, right? I definitely understand. There could be punishment, right? If we're not doing what God said. If I put my best foot forward, right, it doesn't necessarily mean the work is going to be done by others. Why? Because let's say the vast majority are not doing what God wants, right? What do we see today? 14.5 million Jews. How many Jews, quote unquote, are Orthodox? Maybe 1 million, maybe, right? It's less than 10%. That's pretty bad, right? So even if you're doing what you're supposed to do, maybe this will override. Shouldn't we say the work will be done by others because you're doing the right thing? But the reality is most people aren't. So there's a difference between if we're listening to God's commandments and keeping them, or we're doing it like a son who wants to fulfill the will of their father. That's a major difference. In other words, if a person's keeping the mitzvahs only for one reason, because I don't want to fry in hell forever, they're keeping it because they don't want to get punished. That's a certain level, right? It's a weak level. It's a low level. So there's a major difference, someone doing that and someone who wants to fulfill the will of their father. That's a whole different thing. Because what does it mean to fulfill the will of your father? that the Torah says, if you listen to what the Torah says, then you're going to have food, then you're going to have water, right? You're going to keep the mitzvahs themselves. So even if the Torah says you listen to what it says, still, I have to put my best foot forward. I can't just say, well, God's going to take care of me and that's it, right? I don't have that level. I can't have that level of emunah, of faith in God. I have to put my best foot forward. But if a person wants to do God's will with love and desire, right? That's a whole different level. That will have the work done by others. Meaning, there's a difference where I'm doing it, stay away from punishment. Even if I'm doing it, maybe the worst thing is I'm doing it by rote.
Right.
Right? In other words, I prayed today because I prayed yesterday. And I prayed yesterday because I prayed the day before. But there isn't anything interesting in my prayers. So to speak, I'm doing it because I do it.
Boring.
I believe it. It's the right thing to do, but you're doing it by rote. Right? I heard Rav Aaron Feldman should be well, the head of Ner Yisrael Yeshiva in Baltimore, and said, and he claimed that the problem we're having today, with this virus and yeshivas and synagogues being shut down, is because we're doing things by rote. Right? Even in the yeshivas, even by learning, etc., we're doing things by rote. Doing things by rote is akin to spiritual death. Right? It's akin to spiritual death. So there's a difference between keeping the mitzvahs by rote, even though you're keeping them, you get credit for it. Or if you're doing it with tremendous love, tremendous desire. My goal is every day you have that fire lit, even if you get beaten down in life. Right? Doesn't matter. You have that fire lit. You are the energized bunny. You're going as much as you can. That we say over here is that the merit will work that work will be done by others. That's if the desire and the strength is there, right? Otherwise, if I'm just doing things by rote in general, what's going to happen? I'll get credit, right? I'll definitely get credit, and I'll get reward. It's not going to look at the same as if I did it, with great love, with a bren, with a fire, as we would say in Yiddish. So we mentioned as well, we spoke last week about spending money, right, and doing it for the sake of mitzvahs. So even a person spends a lot of money and he uses it for the sake of heaven. Now, you couldn't say a person could lose out. How could you lose out? Because you spend a substantial amount buying a house, buying a car, buying furniture, right? Let's say you're a little more extravagant than you should. Doesn't mean you have to live in a hovel by any stretch. But again, person should live within their means. And, these things, okay, doesn't mean a person shouldn't have a nice house, etc. But, people go overboard. But on mitzvahs, though, what do? They skimp. In other words, they'll buy a lulav, they'll buy an esrog. Yeah, they won't buy the best one. They'll buy, a third-rate one. Why? Because they're cheap. Because when it comes to mitzvahs, they're cheap. When it comes to buying a car, top of the line, best stereo, best this, furniture, 100%. Comes to buying a lemon on steroids, you're a cheapskate. Right? Again, everyone within their means. But what happens over here? If you skimp on mitzvahs, then that's a disgrace and a desecration of God's name. Why? This is very simple. The reason is you're showing to the world material possessions are more valuable than a relationship to God. So what we're doing is we're making what's secondary much more important. The whole point of me serving God is to serve at the highest level, right? In other words, there's an idea. Any mitzvah we do, we have a menorah, should be a nice menorah. Right? I have a kiddush cup, should be a nice one, a lulav, an esrog, my talis, tefillin, whatever. A person has to spend within their means. But if you spend a lot more money on your decor, right, on your decorations, on things that are never going to last forever, bang, right? They're not going to last forever. A car, furniture, any of these things, then the reality is you missed the boat. You absolutely missed the boat, because furniture, a car, okay, I can buy a nice one, doesn't have to be the most fancy, right? I don't have to spend a ton of money on it. I don't have to necessarily, look for bargains per se,
Be practical.
But, we go overboard. We go overboard. So what you're showing is, again, says King David, we're only in the world for 70 years, right? If we have strength, we're here for 80 years. How much can you eat? How many cars can you drive? How many houses, if you have money, whatever.
Yeah.
Look where that money could go. So if you're not supporting Torah, and the majority of your money is going to things that don't matter at all, what you're saying is, my relationship with something that is finite is greater than my relationship with someone that's infinite. Right? In other words, you're saying my material possessions outweigh my relationship to God. That's what you're saying. So there will be people out there that will say, why should I help this other person? Let them get a better job. Let them work harder. I made money. I invented a pet rock. I invented that umbrella, that toothpick umbrella goes into cocktail drinks. I made my money. I inherited it. I earned it, whatever it is. Let another person do it. Why should I help them? Even if they're down. And you're living in the lap of luxury. You're not waiting for your next meal. You're not having, a difficult time and all that. The person makes excuses. I'm not saying, everyone out there is a miser, etc. But they also don't necessarily help things that are beneficial. People say, I'm going to give money to save the whales. I'm going to give money to, upkeep of a dog shelter. So they're going to say, well, aren't dogs important? Right? Aren't animals important? Right? I'm not going to say animals are not necessarily important. I think, I see people all the time, post things about their dogs and their cats and their, like they're a part of the family. Like that's just normal, right? So to speak, in that world. Listen, I grew up with a dog, so I can say that, so, is that where someone's money, should go? So you say, I can give my money to wherever I want. You're right. Everyone's got free will. Everyone's got free choice. But, if a person is holding by keeping Torah mitzvahs, then I would think that money should go to Torah mitzvahs, right? It should go to help out poor families. It should go to help out, widows, right? Help marry off their kids. It should go to all kinds of things that are worthwhile. Now all the PETA or PETA activists be jumping up and down. What? Dogs aren't people? No, they're not. Actually, they're dogs. That's what they are. Pets are nice to have around. I get it, right? But the question is that where my money should go? Should I be, giving money to dog shelters? Or should I give money to rabbis or yeshivas or girls' schools or, help build up Noahide communities? These things are much more valuable.
For sure.
Certainly. I'm not anti-dog per se to be anti-dog, right? But you have to look at things in perspective. And again, I see this all the time, which, I understand where it comes from. I definitely understand where it comes from. This dog's been around for a long time, part of the family, a trooper or this. Okay. But don't forget one major thing. They're a dog, right? I don't care if they're reincarnated. There's a soul in that dog. I don't really care. It's a dog, right? It's a turtle. It's a hamster, right? All these different things. You want to support that? You want to support that? Let someone else support it. Plenty of non-Jews out there to support these things, right? Why do you have to support these things? Oh, something close to my heart, something that really means something. So, our values are totally skewed, right? They are 100% skewed because, again, animals have their place. They definitely have their place. But there are many, many, many good causes to give rather than to animal shelters. Right? I'm not saying no one, you're not gonna have people give to animal shelter. You got plenty of people, love animals that'll help support that. Or some people leave their money to a dog, for goodness sake. So, but what's the point over here? The point is that we do things. We have the ability, to do things, to put our money in things that are just flushing it down the toilet spiritually, right? You're giving money to something where it's something only temporary. You give it to a yeshiva, you give it to a girls' school, you help marry off needy brides. That's something eternal, right? That's something you get the merit forever, right? So it's helping a dog shelter. You get some sort of merit, I guess. Is that the same? Is that the same as helping building a Noahide community? No. Is that the same as how building a yeshiva? No. Is that the same as how building someone's organization wants to help save other Jews, and educate them? Not even close. But people say, I have a right to give to whoever I want. Okay? I'm not arguing that point. What I'm arguing is, in the bigger scheme of things, is that where God wants your money to go? Right? And I would think the answer is no. Why? Because, again, if you're giving money to other things and you're skimping on mitzvahs, and you're skimping on what you pay for mitzvahs, that's an absolute disgrace. That's a desecration of God's name. Right? I don't think there's any question about it. Because if a person has a ton of money and you're wasting it, right? You're wasting it on things that shouldn't be wasted on, then God's going to say, what did I give you this money for in the first place? Right? If you look at, which I did many years ago, you look at the UJA, the UJC, right? United Jewish Appeal, United Jewish Congress, they raise probably, $500 million a year. Right? So I would say, how much money goes to building trees in Israel? $1 million, $2 million. A lot of money go to help gays and lesbians, right? Other things that are bad, that go against Torah. So you're going to raise that kind of money, give it to good sources. You give it to bad sources, you don't get credit for that. You get zero credit for that. Just the opposite. You just, God allows you to raise this amount of money, but it's all being wasted. It's all totally being wasted. Right? So we have to know that it has to go to a good place. And if it doesn't go to a good place, a person gives millions. And if a person gives millions to save the whales or save dogs or, some LGBT thing or whatever, that God despises, you don't get credit for that. You don't even get a little credit for that. So that could destroy a person also. God could say, I gave you all this money. And that's what you gave it to. So it could be he gave him a lot of money because they don't want him to pray. He wants to kick him out of the next world. He'll reward him for the few mitzvahs that they do in this world. That's it. But he gives them an opportunity. Gives them a golden opportunity. They blow it. And Lahavdil will make a big distinction here. You take entertainment people, you take actors, actresses, you take athletes, and the amounts of money that they make, where does it go? It's wasted, right? How many cars? Look at Mike Tyson when he bought tigers,
Bling.
cars,
bling,
anything. All they blew it. Right? I don't have any money now, right? Totally blown. Okay, God has to reward people for whatever bits that they do in this world, but you look, and what these people make is absurd, right? It's absolutely absurd. So some of them, we'll cut them some slack. Actually, give the halfway decent things. A lot of it, 100% is wasted. What are you going to do with the house with like 40 rooms? Only 2 people, 3 people, 4 people. Say, let them use their money any way they want. You're right. I don't care how they use their money. Right? It doesn't really matter because it's being wasted. It's being chucked in the garbage. Right? But imagine how many people they could help. Millions. A lot of them. A lot of it gets wasted. So they give it a golden opportunity. Jews and non-Jews, give it golden opportunity.
Right.
They use it for the wrong thing. Total disgrace. Right? Total desecration of God's name. Because again, what are they showing? They're showing to the world that the most important thing is material possession. I'm not saying people have to live like a pauper. We're not making that
so many
statement.
out there are lost, though, Rabbi. They just don't know. They
But
just don't know.
how could you not know? There are people homeless. There are people that struggle, etc. How could
They
they
close
not
a blind
know?
eye.
Helping other people. How could they not know helping other people is worse, or I shouldn't do it, and rather I should spend, $5-10 million on a mansion? How could they not be benevolent?
They're so focused on themselves.
They're not going to get upstairs, and God's going to say, "Hey, I'm zapping you because I gave you a ton of money and you blew it on yourself." You can say, "Well, you should have showed me." God's going to say it's common sense. This is common sense. If I have an opportunity to help somebody, I'm not saying all your money has to go there, but if you have an opportunity to help someone, right? Why in the world are you going to blow it, on a house and on cars or whatever, which you don't need, right? Which essentially you don't need, and I saw somebody, recently bought a yacht, $40 million. Okay, you can do what you want. Let him buy a yacht for $40 million. Imagine what $40 million could do. He buying it for pleasure. You know, like he's taking unfortunate kids that don't have fathers, and he's taking them out on the, to cruise, the Mediterranean. He's not doing that, right? Oh, God forbid, right? He's doing it for pleasure. So you're going to say, well, so what's someone going to answer? They're going to answer, you shut your big mouth because I'm going to do whatever I want with my money. True. 100%. But you have to think, if I've been given this money, shouldn't I help those more, less fortunate? And you're going to say, well, a lot of these people don't have high IQs. That's also true. But also may be true. May not be true, may be true. Whatever the case is. But they can say, I work for this money. I earned it. I'll spend it the way I want. Right? But we're living for a higher purpose. We're not living for three of us, me, myself, and I. Right? We're not living for all three of us. There's only one of us. Right? The question you're going to be asked is, what did you do in this world? And, and if you were given that kind of chump change in my language, then why didn't you use it for the right thing? You got to say, I enjoyed going, to the Gulf of Mexico, my yacht. Okay. And there are people starving, and there are people could use this kind of help and that kind of help. $40 million is a lot of money. Right? So I can say, okay, so buy it for a lot less money. Use the other money for that. Say, I'll use the money for what I want. This, I'm enjoying myself. Okay. Right? But there's a higher purpose. They're looking at this world as the ultimate. And if they have the ability to help others and they don't, right, it's a horrific thing over here. Now, this is something that's obvious. This is not something, that's going to get hammered for and say, I could never have known this. How could I ever have known this? So you'll say you're right. Yeah, brought up a certain way. They think a certain way. Money goes to their head. They got all this money. What should I use it on? Themselves. I'm not saying they don't necessarily help other people. I'm sure there are people out there help other people if they have that kind of money, right? The reality is though probably most may help some people. The rest will use for themselves, and they'll enjoy much more than they'll ever need in 10 lifetimes.
Of course,
right? I would think, and again, this is just for me,
billionaires,
but I would think this is obvious, right? This is not something they're going to hammer it for no reason. This is something where you're given this amount. Then there are some people that are very philanthropic, that help others and give to good things and all that. The vast majority got a ton of money. They waste it. They waste it on food. They waste it on on all kinds of different material things. And yeah, they should know better.
I've seen it, though, Rabbi. I've seen it on the other side of the spectrum where very wealthy people lose touch of reality. They don't even realize. They think common wages are nickels, and they tip nickels. They just are very, very frugal because they don't know any better.
Wealth is just like poverty. It's a test.
Oh.
It's a test. Are you going to thank God even though you don't have as much? Or if you have a lot, you give God the proverbial finger and just say, I'm going to do what I want. Doesn't really matter. You're right. It does go to their head.
I've seen them so wealthy. I've seen them so wealthy in the prairies, Rabbi, farmers. and they're so afraid that somebody's going to grab a chunk that they walk around looking like haggard street people, poor people. They just, it's disgusting, and you can tell they're just in love and hoarding, and they don't want anybody to know. And it's like their mind is so closed and shut off.
That's also true. People don't want to give it up. They want to keep it. They want to, stay on top of it. That all makes sense. There are some people that grew up, difficult times, and they understand what it means to struggle and not have.
Right.
So some of them are actually able to give back. Right. But you're right. There are plenty of people who lose touch with reality. They think they're almost God themselves. Right. They think they can buy people. They can, all kinds of things, narcissism and all kinds of things. Okay. But, deep down, that's not an excuse. Right. Deep down, they have to know what the right thing is. And if they don't, they go astray. Okay. So God wasted his time, gave them that money, and he's going to fry them for it.
Well, Rabbi, our time's up, and I've got to wind this down to get into our my next class. Have you got anything to just sum this all up as a?
Mishnah.
I'm sorry.
So we'll start the Mishnah next week.
Number 5. We start Mishnah 5 next week.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy, it's going to be exciting, folks. We got a new one going starting next week. We've been on this one for the last few weeks.
Don't separate yourself from the community. Don't believe in yourself to the day you die. Don't judge your fellow until you've reached this place. Lot to speak about.
It's going to be exciting, folks. Well, there you go, folks. Next week, join us. He's jumping into Mishnah 5. It's going to be real exciting. So I've got to step out for my next class. So, folks, have a wonderful, wonderful week. Thanks for everybody that joined with us. Please feel free to support Rabbi Coffman, folks. You can find him on orthodoxconversion.com. Go check it out, especially if you're interested in conversion.
Facebook Beyond Orthodox Conversion to Judaism.
There you go. Facebook at Beyond Orthodox Conversion. Wonderful pages. He's always sharing his heart out. Plus, he does his wonderful Tanakh Talk show. Folks, till next week, this is Dan signing off with Rabbi Chaim Coffman, Pirkei Avos, the Ethics of the Fathers, live from Israel. Always a good class, folks. Bye for now.